Hey everyone. Over the last couple of months, I've been making a lot of experiments, doing side-by-side comparisons in order to figure out how to make authentic New York pizza at home. Now first, let's get this out of the way. I know there's a lot of different styles and varieties of New York pizza. What I'm going for is what I call an old school traditional New York style. Thin crust, something like a Scar's or a Joe's. When I go to New York, I'm actually researching pizza. I'm not just going around and trying different places and making an opinion. I'm actually looking at different analytics, thickness and color and density and everything, weight. And so I'm going after pizza such as a Scar's or a Joe's, which is really thin crust. You look at the pictures here that I took, you're looking at between 5 and 7 millimeters towards the center, the crust is. Towards the rim, the crust gets out to about 10 to 12 millimeters. And then the rim itself is going to be between 15 to 20 millimeters, depending on how much air is in the rim. And you look at the coloring, it's not really a golden brown. It's a light brown with some little burn marks on it. And then, of course, the bottom of the crust is crispy. It actually cracks when you fold it. So that's the style of New York pizza I'm going for. I know you're going to be able to find everything, especially the last couple of decades. People have been influenced by who knows what to make all sorts of different varieties of pizza in New York, but this is the style I'm going for. And so I'm going to put it all together in this video and tell you what I've learned, what to do and what not to do. So to get started, what you're going to need is a pizza pan of some sort. I have this cast iron one. It works really good in the home oven. It works better than the brick ones, the ceramic ones that you have. It just heats up faster and transmits the heat really, really good. Reheats faster too. Pizza peel, wood one works better than metal one, I've learned. You've got to have a laser thermometer, see how hot the pan is. And then two different sets of scales, one for the larger measurements, one for the smaller. You really got to be precise when it comes to this. Don't be tempted to try to go online and do a conversion of grams to teaspoons, tablespoons. It just doesn't work. You've got to be really precise, and the only way to do that is to measure in grams and milliliters. So that's what we're doing here. Now let's start with the flour. I've experimented with a lot of different types of flour. My favorite is King Arthur bread flour. Bread flour is a must. I've done these side-by-side experiments where the recipe is the exact same other than the type of flour, and bread flour compared to the all-purpose flour is going to be lighter, stronger, and more airy, significantly. I did one experiment where I used King Arthur bread flour, which is 12.7% protein, with King Arthur all-purpose flour, which is only 1% less at 11.7% protein. And the results were very significant. As you can see, the one made out of the bread flour here was just a more dense crust, thicker, more floppy compared to the bread flour. It does make a difference. I've experimented with different brands of bread flour. King Arthur just tastes the best. I've had bread flours that look great, but it just comes across as very, very bland. There's not much flavor in it. So my favorite is King Arthur. If you do a different type of flour, just make sure it's bread flour, has a very high protein content. Next is salt. So I'm doing, here's the recipe. Okay, putting 2.8% salt in is a little more than a lot of pizzerias. Some do more. Basically, when you add salt, it just gives the crust a lot more flavor, but it also delays the rising time. And so when I was experimenting with salt quantity, I learned that you can't have any more yeast than what I'm putting in here. Otherwise, it raises too fast, and the gluten strands in the dough, they just don't bond properly, they don't form properly, and the dough becomes too weak, and you can't shape it properly. So this is as much yeast as I've been able to use. I could even use less. If you don't mind having it rise longer, you can use less yeast. But this is a really good amount of salt. It tastes good. It controls the rise. When you have more salt in, then the rise slows down. So this is just a great combination of the yeast and salt. I've done an experiment with olive oil. I did two dough balls, exact same, other than olive oil. One had olive oil and one didn't. The one with a little bit of olive oil was significantly stronger dough. It just was stronger, it shaped better, and so that's why we use it. Sugar. I did side-by-sides with sugar. Dough balls exactly the same, other than one had sugar, one didn't. The one with sugar, it simply tasted better. It didn't taste sweeter. It just tasted more, the crust had a lot more mature flavor to it because the sugar speeds up the fermentation process. And so that's why I use sugar. Water, not a lot to say there. However, I will say that the water temperature will make a huge difference in how fast the dough ball rises. So I usually use room temperature, but if I'm in a bind, if I really want to make crust faster, I will heat it up a little bit, probably to close to 100 degrees, like a hot tub or so, maybe a little more. Okay, I've done a side-by-side experiment with rising the dough at room temperature for about 3.5 hours compared to putting the same dough ball in the fridge. And the result was the dough ball in the fridge has so much more time to ferment and for the gluten strands to bond, that the end result is the dough that came out of the fridge is stronger and lighter and more airy, especially in the rim, as you can see right here in this picture. This is from the experiment. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in the ingredients. Water first. I've got these pre-measured out. Olive oil. I've been using extra virgin olive oil, but I don't know if it makes that much of a difference if it's extra virgin or regular. I'm going to put the sugar in and the yeast and the flour. I just throw them all in at once. It doesn't matter. I don't turn the mixer on first or anything. And then I put the salt on top. And that's it. All right. So I only added enough ingredients to make one dough ball. And it's so small in the bowl that the dough hook barely even touches it. So when I'm making one ball, I just use the batter one. Any more than one ball, I'll use a dough hook. But for this, just the batter. While this is mixing, let me just mention a couple things. You want to mix it at a low speed because that allows for the incorporation of air into the dough. It's kind of like how the old Italians used to mix this by hand. We're trying to go for the same effect. If you mix it too fast, you don't have the dough folding over and trapping air. So we're trying to go for that effect. And you don't want it to mix too much. So when you're kneading dough, you got to, like, there's these gluten strands like this, and you're kind of folding it over and making them get tighter and tighter, because that's where the strength comes from. But if you over knead it, then you're going to start getting them too tight and they're going to tear. So if you see the dough start to actually like tear on the surface, you've kneaded it too far. All right. So it only takes a couple minutes. And what I've learned works best is I knead it in the mixer for just a minute or two, or 3 if you have a larger batch. And then we're going to let it rest at room temperature for about 45 minutes, and then shape the dough ball, and then put it in the fridge. And that's it. This is what you want it to look like. It's sticky because of high hydration. Oh, I didn't mention that. So this hydration is 65%. I've experimented with lower hydration, and really anything lower than that, I mean, when I was doing like 59, 60%, the crust comes out a lot more dense, not as airy and soft and light and strong. And so 65% is the magic number for me cooking that at this home oven. So let's see. I mean, that was only mixing for what, a minute and a half, 2 minutes at the most. Okay, you can see it's mixed. It's not in a pretty dough ball yet. It's sticky. I'm going to let it sit here for about 45 minutes, covered in plastic wrap, and then I'll check back and we're going to shape a dough ball. All right, it's been about 45 minutes. Let's take a look at the dough. It looks just like it did before, but it's actually going to be a lot more gooey and workable. Yeah, it's good and gooey. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to trap some air inside and fold it over a couple times and create a ball out of it. At the same time, I'm kind of kneading it. Again, you can put a little bit of flour on your hands if you want. I try to avoid it as much as possible because I don't want to tweak the hydration percentage, but I'm sure a little bit doesn't matter. You don't need it. So, and then just tie up the ends like that. Oh, let's see. I just roll it out like that. And we got a beautiful dough ball right there. I'm going to put it right inside a lightly oiled bowl, cover it up, put it in the fridge overnight. This will be good in the fridge for 10 hours to 18, 20 hours. And then I'm going to take it out and let it rise at room temperature for, maybe an hour, hour and a half, depending on the water temperature that I made the dough out of, basically. So that's it. I'm going to put it in the fridge. We'll check back tomorrow and continue. Welcome back. The dough ball was in the fridge for about 24 hours, a little bit longer than I wanted to, but that's how my day is gone today. It looks just great, actually. I took it out about an hour and 20 minutes ago, so it's been rising at room temperature, which is pretty warm in our house right now in Phoenix. It's like 78 degrees right now. So it's been rising. It looks really good. I'm going to take it out, and then we're going to talk about tomatoes for a few minutes. You can see it's just really lightweight and fluffy. Now, before I start shaping that, I want to talk about tomatoes real quick. Today I'm using Cento Italian style whole peel tomatoes. I did a whole video on tomatoes, I think a couple of them actually. I've experimented with probably 8 to 10 different American branded tomatoes and a few different, maybe 4 to 5 to 6 different brands and types, styles of Italian imported tomatoes. And here's what I've learned. I learned that American tomatoes are horrible. They're awful. They taste awful. They put additives in them. Every single American brand of tomatoes I've come across, I believe, uses both citric acid and calcium chloride as additives. They say the citric acid is meant to act as a antibacterial type of deal to keep bacteria growth away. I don't know why it's necessary. Italians don't do it, and apparently they're doing just fine with their tomatoes. The problem is when you add citric acid to tomatoes, it makes them more sour. And the only way to counterbalance this is the acidity is to add a lot of sugar. So when you go to a lower end pizzeria, a fast food pizzeria, even a lot of New York pizzerias, the sauce is going to be very, very sweet. And that's part of the reason why. The main reason why is because they're using lower grade tomatoes that have citric acid, and then they have to add a lot of sugar to counteract the acidity. Calcium chloride is a preservative. It makes tomatoes more firm, and the problem with that is it has a weird salty kind of taste. And on top of that, the American grown tomatoes just don't have as good a flavor. Even when you balance the citric acid with sugar and you taste them, they just don't taste as good, not even close. If you don't believe me, go do your own blind taste test with your friends. It's the difference in quality is very drastic. So out of the Italian brands I've tried, my two favorites are Cento Italian style. I compare these side by side with the San Marzanos, and the San Marzanos are about that much better than these ones, and it's not worth the price. They're another, $1.50 a can. These are just about as good. So this is what I usually get. Now, when I want a treat, I'm going to go and get the Mutti brand, Mutti brand tomatoes. It's Italy's most common, most used canned tomatoes, and they're fantastic. When I was in Italy a number of years ago, eating a lot of pizza throughout southern Italy and Sicily, The tomatoes I had on the pizza there tasted just like the Muti brand tomatoes that I eat here. Very good tomatoes, the best. Some of these tomatoes have salt added, others don't. So Centone ones do have sea salt. So for this can, for this 28-ounce can, I'm going to add 7 grams of salt to it. The Muti ones don't have any salt, so I'm going to add 8 grams, and then it comes out about the same. So that's for tomatoes themselves. As far as sauce goes, when you go to New York, you're going to see pizzas with a variety of different types of sauces. Some New York pizzerias have sauce that is made only of tomatoes and salt. That's it. The more common sauce for New York pizza is going to have some seasoning in there. Not much, really just some basil, maybe a little bit of basil, and kind of heavy on the oregano, and maybe a little bit of garlic, but probably just oregano and basil. I'll put my recipe up. This is something I've come up with that tastes really good. It's kind of hard to just taste only the sauce on a pizza in New York, you know, because there's cheese and everything mixed in. But I do my best to kind of isolate it and taste it. And this is what I've come up with that's something comparable to Scars. Now, so sometimes when I'm making pizza, New York style, I will use only tomatoes and salt. Other times I'll use the sauce recipe right there. Now, when I use tomatoes and salt, they taste really good. But when I add oregano in, according to the recipe, oregano is such a bitter herb that you have to add sugar to counterbalance that. That's why I got sugar in that recipe. Let's see. Also, we need to talk about the consistency of the tomatoes. You're going to have sauce in New York pizza that has like a puree, very fine puree spread tomatoes. You're going to have sauce that has small chunks in it, medium chunks, and large chunks. DeFara here is the biggest chunks I've ever seen. DeFara is a very well-known pizzeria in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and they're using great big chunks. So different ways to do it, but stick true to Scars. I've made this sauce more of a puree. And so I've got it pre-measured for this 12-ounce or the 12-inch pizza. I use 75 grams of sauce and 85 grams of cheese. So I've done side-by-side comparisons with cheese. Skim milk versus whole milk. Honestly, the difference between, at least, okay, the experiment I did with skim milk and whole milk was with using Trader Joe's brand mozzarella. It's just my favorite tasting mozzarella, just a personal preference. But the whole milk mozzarella had not that much more protein and fat than the skim milk one, and I could barely tell a difference between the part skim and the whole milk once it was on my pie and cooked, barely. So some pizzerias use all part skim cheese. Others use, it's pretty common to do a blend of some ratio of part skim and whole milk. I don't know if a lot of pizzerias out there are doing all whole milk, but some I'm sure are. But I just use part skim because a little bit less cholesterol, but I really can't tell that much of a difference. And I have talked with a couple of guys in the comments about pre-grated versus grating my own. Whatever it is, whenever I've tried pre-grated mozzarella, it comes out dry. I'm guessing just the process of grating it, and it's in open air for a while before it's packaged, it loses some of its moisture. That's my assumption. Whatever it is, I always buy the blocks and grate it. It just tastes better. It's gooier, better flavor, more moist. Okay. So I did a whole video on shaping pizzas. You can go back and watch it. But basically what we're doing is pressing the air out to the rim, like that. Press the air out to the rim. That's how you get a nice, airy rim. It's lightweight. The fast food pizzerias, they just have machines that flattens the whole thing out. And so the air bubbles are distributed evenly, which is why most of them have some kind of a roller that goes through and punctures the whole dough, so you don't have air bubbles everywhere. And this dough is really soft. This is going to be good. You got to be careful not to poke your fingers through the dough. I try to let gravity stretch it out and not my hands. If gravity's stretching it out, then the gluten bonds, the gluten strands are going to be, flexing in a natural way, and it's going to be not as likely to have a dough tear. This dough is pretty soft, so I'm not going to toss it too much. I'm just going to stretch it out like that. I'm going to talk about the crisper here in a minute. I just have this out for reference. This is a 12-inch crisper, and my pie is just about exactly 12 inches, maybe 11 and a half, depending on how soft the dough is. The recipe I provided will make somewhere between 11 and 12 inch, maybe 12 and a half inch sometimes pizza. All right, let's get the peel out. Yesterday I mentioned that I prefer wood peels and over metal, and the reason is the dough really just slides around a lot easier. It doesn't get stuck to it nearly as often. I'll put the sauce on. As far as the measurements for the sauce and cheese go, it was really just experimenting. Experiment, go back to New York, try some more, and this is kind of the numbers I came up with, at least for scars. Some pizzerias like Cornet, they use probably 2 to 3 times as much cheese as I use here. My 2 favorite pizzerias in New York are Scars on Orchard Avenue and Patsy's up in East Harlem, and they both make a similar pizza. They have their differences, but when it comes to the crust and amount of cheese and overall appearance, it's very similar. Okay, that's that. Now let's talk about the oven real quick. Well, let's take a look. Just as it is right here, you can tell from the video that there's some real nice air bubbles forming in the rim from me pushing the air out. Well, you'll see those pop up. Let's check the temperature real quick. Like most ovens, my max is out at 550, and that actually translates to the pizza pan. That should be around 620, 630 degrees on the top rack. So let's see. Yeah, 625. I'm going to put the pie in. We'll talk about this for a minute. All right, top rack, bottom rack, middle rack, broiler. I've tried them all. Crisper. I've tried them all with this, without it. And here's what I've learned. When you bake the pie on the bottom rack, the pan gets too hot. And so you put a pie on, and the bottom just gets burned before the top gets, it gets cooked properly. The cheese isn't melted enough, and the rim isn't cooked enough. It's not browned up enough. So somebody invented these crispers, right? You see these occasionally in New York, not that often. Well, maybe 25, 30% of the pizzerias will use these. The whole idea is you put the crust on here, and so it raises it up off of the oven floor a little bit to cool the baking speed down, to slow it down, so that way the bottom doesn't get burned while the top cooks. You can put the pie on the crispers initially, put it in. You can put the pie on the pan initially and then put it on here, put it back in. It doesn't really matter. The idea is just to cool down the crust a little bit, the bottom of the crust, so the rest can cook properly. So I tried using crisper on the bottom rack, and the top of the pie still didn't cook properly. It just didn't brown over good enough, and it was in there too long, a little bit too long. And when the cheese is in too long, it just kind of gets, dried out. So the bottom rack didn't work. The broiler, when I turned the broiler on high, I could get that pizza pan up to 640 degrees. And the problem was when I put the pizza on the pan using the broiler, the top of the pizza would get cooked too fast and the bottom wasn't crispy at all. It just wasn't cooked enough. Now, most pizza in New York is going to have a crispy bottom. That's what I'm going for. If you don't care about that, then go ahead. You can use a broiler. A lot of guys do that. It'll cook your pie faster. Right now, the way I'm doing it, it's going to cook for about 4 minutes, maybe 4:30. With a broiler, yeah, you can do it in about 2:30 or less even. But I want a crispy bottom. If you spend any time in Italy, true, the pizzas there are cooked in 1,000-degree ovens and the bottom is not crispy. That's fine, just different style. But I'm going for Scar's, Patsy's type of pizza, and I want a crispy bottom. And so the best results I've had is just to use the regular oven cooked on the top rack. It just is the right balance of getting the bottom crispy and cooking the top. I've tried the crisper on the top rack, and it just didn't crisp. It didn't crisp up the bottom of the pizza good enough. So that's how I do it, and I'm going to let it sit for another minute or so, and then I'll check back. This is looking really good. I can tell the crust is going to be perfect. The crust is looking really lightweight, really airy. Yeah, that's going to be good. And when I'm baking it, what I'm looking for is the cheese on top. As soon as little brown spots appear, that's how I know it's done. We're getting really close. It's hard to see in the oven because it's up all the way, but I got to take a little sneak peek. Really close. And you got to watch it carefully because you've only got like a 15 to 20 second window of having a properly cooked pizza and a burned pizza. Let's take a look here. So you can see the rim's getting really good. I'm going to put back in for about 15 more seconds, 20 more seconds. That's looking really good. This is totally acceptable. I just want a tiny bit more. Here it is. Look at that. That is a beautiful pizza. While the pizza's cooling down, I wanted to mention one thing. I mentioned yesterday I use a cast iron pizza pan. It heats up fast. Now, the one problem with that is when you put the pie in, all that heat from the cast iron transfers to the bottom of the crust. After you cook a pie, that pizza pan is going to drop all the way down to about 540 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're going to cook more than one pizza, you've got to let it reheat back up to 620, which can take about 5, 6, 7 minutes. Just be aware of that. All right, I'm going to cut it open. It's been cooling down for just a couple of minutes. And if we've done this right, we're going to have a little bit of cracking on the crust when we fold it. Yep, so you see a little bit of cracking right there. I think you can see it in the camera, like right there, right there. So that's how we want it. This is outstanding, authentic New York style pizzeria, at least according to, Scar's or Patsy's style. When you buy a slice in New York, the pie's been sitting there for a while, and so they're gonna take it and put it back into the oven for about 1 minute to 90 seconds. And what that does is it really crisps up the bottom. In fact, sometimes I'll do that. I'll let the pie cool down, throw it back in there to get that extra crispy bottom, but I'm not going to do that today. I like it both ways. This is fine, but just be advised, if you're in New York, you get a slice and it's super duper crispy on the bottom, that's why. Okay, so measurement, that is about 5 to 6 millimeters, it looks like. Same over here, and then the rim is about 10 to 15. So I think we're really good there on the measurements. This looks about like you're going to have at Patsy's or Scar's. Theirs is going to be a little bit darker just because their oven's hotter, but that's really good. Now let's take a closer look at the rim. Yeah, this is just outstanding. I mean, look at this. Great big airy rim. Strong. You can't see it obviously, but it's very lightweight. It's strong, lightweight. Chewy. That crust is exceptional. Everything good. This is a good piece of pizza. Okay, that's how you do it. That's how you make authentic New York style pizza at home. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you.